Welcome, dear subscribers and curious listeners of my channel. The Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry is the heart of the entire Harry Potter saga, a place where magic, friendship and adventure are woven together. Reading the books or rewatching the films, you feel as if you've stepped into a fairy tale. It seems like Hogwarts is the perfect place, but the older you get, the more oddities begin to stand out. Beneath the glossy surface of magic lies a heap of questions that, to put it mildly, are hard to ignore. Let's unpack them together. Enjoy the video. Number 1. Dumbledore, the worst thing that could have happened to Hogwarts. When the Malfoys claimed Dumbledore was a real problem for the school, it felt like a nasty jab. Harry was outraged, and so were we. But let's be honest, now it's much clearer that there was far more truth in those words than we'd like to admit. During his time as headmaster, the school regularly became a battlefield of mortal danger. Death Eaters breached the grounds, cursed objects were hidden in its walls, and students faced threats that would send grown wizards running. And what did Dumbledore do? He let it happen, in the name of teaching Harry. The question is, how many students had to be harmed before the headmaster decided things had gone too far? Number 2. Many teachers were bad at their jobs. Hogwarts is presented as one of the best magical schools in the world, but if you dig just a little deeper, the faculty raises serious concerns. The emotionless Ghost Binns delivers lectures that literally put students to sleep. Hagrid, a wonderful person, is completely unfit to teach. Lockhart, an obvious fraud. Trelawney, a seer who occasionally has real visions but otherwise seems barely competent. Even Snape, for all his skill, regularly abuses his position. It's strange that after so many years the school never developed a proper vetting process. Stranger still that parents never protested. Number 3. Hogwarts needed more parental involvement. Remember how often Draco Malfoy threatened to tell his father? Back then it sounded like a spoiled child whining, but now we realize he actually had a point. Wizarding parents were shockingly indifferent. Their children were constantly in danger, and yet no one seemed to question what was happening inside those castle walls. No protests, no investigations, no letters to the ministry. And this was a school where the headmaster kept dangerous objects on site, hired questionable staff, and even allowed a 3-headed dog to roam the dungeons. Number 4. The point system was meaningless. On the surface, rewarding students with points for good behavior and deducting them for violations seems fair, but in reality, it's absurd and built on favoritism. Remember how Dumbledore handed out extra points to Gryffindor at the end of Philosopher's Stone? Right in front of everyone, he rewrote the outcome, snatching victory from Slytherin. Teachers like Snape routinely deducted points from students they disliked and ignored the faults of their favorites. Where's the fairness in that? Where's the motivation? Number 5. The house system was biased. Sorting students into houses based on personality traits sounds noble until you look at the consequences. Slytherins are branded as villains from the start. Hufflepuffs are mocked for being mediocre. Ravenclaws for being too bookish. Only Gryffindor is consistently praised and romanticized. How are kids supposed to grow freely without pressure and labels? Hogwarts doesn't unite students. It divides them. It implants in their minds that they are a certain type from day one. Number 6. Hiring a squib as caretaker was cruel. Argus Filch is a squib, someone born into a magical family without magical abilities. And they hired him to work in a castle overflowing with magic. Every day, he has to watch children using wands, flying, casting spells. He is a man without magic, living in a world of magic. It's like hiring a blind person to work in an art gallery, humiliating, cruel, and suspicious. No wonder he's bitter. Who wouldn't be? Number 7. The ministry's intervention was actually reasonable. When Umbridge showed up at school, everything in us screamed, "Get out!" She symbolized bureaucracy, control, and oppression. But strip away the emotions and you realize the ministry's involvement was predictable. After everything that had happened at Hogwarts, hidden threats, invasions, injured students. Why wouldn't the ministry step in? Why not send someone to figure out what was going on? Yes, Umbridge's methods were cruel, but the idea wasn't insane. In fact, it's surprising that oversight didn't come sooner. Number 8. Dangerous school. Sports were never questioned. Harry's first Quidditch match ended with a swallowed snitch and a trip to the hospital wing. In Chamber of Secrets, a rogue bludger shattered the bones in his arm. "I'll fix that arm of yours straight away, Potter," Lockhart said, then made it worse. Harry lost all the bones. He spent the night regrowing them in agony. And yet, no one questioned the sport itself. Quidditch wasn't just allowed, it was celebrated. Every weekend, students flew high above stone walls and hard ground, dodging iron balls with no safety harness, no magical nets, no supervision that could stop an accident mid-air. And they were 11. First years were sent soaring into the sky with nothing but a broom and a jersey. In Sorcerer's Stone, Madame Hooch left her class alone for 1 minute. In that time, Draco Malfoy stole Neville's Remembrall, and Harry became a Seeker, without a tryout, without a waiver, without a second thought. No helmets, no emergency procedures. The only requirement seemed to be, don't die. Hogwarts treated Quidditch injuries the way other schools treated scraped knees. But this wasn't a game. It was a mid-air brawl on wood sticks, and everyone acted like it was perfectly fine. Number 9. The moving stairs and trick doors were a nightmare. The staircases moved, that was the rule. They like to change, Ron said in Sorcerer's Stone. There were over 100 of them. Some swayed, some vanished, some led to different places every day. In a magical world, that sounded charming. But in a school, it was a nightmare. Students ran to class only to find the staircase had shifted. Doors required the right touch, or a trick word, or even politeness. One wrong step, and you were late, or worse, lost. Once, Harry, Ron, and Hermione took the wrong stairs and ended up on the forbidden third-floor corridor. There, behind a locked door, waited Fluffy, the three-headed dog guarding the trapdoor to the Philosopher's Stone. They weren't trying to be brave. They were trying to get back to bed. One architectural joke, and they nearly got mauled. Did anyone apologize? Add signs? Secure the stairs? No. At Hogwarts, unpredictability was part of the design. But shifting infrastructure isn't quirky, it's dangerous. Imagine if a Muggle school had an elevator that sometimes dropped students off in the boiler room. It would be shut down. At Hogwarts, it was Tuesday, number 10. The Forbidden Forest was a terrible idea from the start. The Forbidden Forest was exactly what its name promised. Forbidden. Dark, dangerous, filled with creatures that even adult wizards feared. But in Sorcerer's Stone, first-year students were sent into it. At night, as punishment. "You're going into the forest," Hagrid told Harry, Hermione, Neville, and Draco. "There's a unicorn been hurt." It wasn't a lesson, it wasn't training, it was detention. The same Draco Malfoy, who had never faced anything more dangerous than a bad grade, was suddenly walking into the woods, where someone, was killing unicorns, and the teachers thought that was an acceptable consequence for sneaking out after hours. They split the group in two. Harry and Draco wandered through the trees, alone, wand in hand. A cloaked figure came crawling across the ground like some stalking beast. The book says it was Voldemort, feasting on unicorn blood. If Firenze hadn't intervened, Harry might have died before even learning the rules of Quidditch. The forest wasn't a schoolyard, it was a death trap. Acromantulas, werewolves, centaurs who no longer trusted humans. Yet the staff kept using it as a learning experience. Hogwarts didn't just neglect safety, it turned trauma into tradition. Number 11, the portraits knew too much. The fat lady wasn't just guarding the entrance to Gryffindor Tower. She listened, she commented, she remembered who came and went. In Prisoner of Azkaban, she vanished in terror after Sirius Black slashed her portrait, but before that, she saw him, knew his face. And still, no one questioned the fact that a painting was essentially the first line of defense. gatekeeper, and hallway gossip all in one. Students passed her every day, whispered passwords, argued with friends. But who else was listening? The frame across the hall, the knight with the dented helmet, Hogwarts was lined with eyes that never blinked and ears that never slept. Phineas Nigellus Black moved between portraits, one in the headmaster's office, one in Grimmauld Place. He spied, reported, delivered Dumbledore's words straight into Harry's ear. In Order of the Phoenix, he said, "You know, this is precisely why I loathed being a teacher. Young people are so infernally convinced that they are absolutely right about everything." He mocked the students, watched their pain, and no one could stop him. Hogwarts didn't just permit surveillance, it framed it, hung it on the walls, called it heritage. Meanwhile, the students had no idea which moment of their lives might be carried away in oil and whispers. Number 12. Food and hygiene were glossed over. Roast beef, treacle tart, pumpkin pasties. Every feast in the Great Hall read like a sugar-drenched dream. Plates refilled themselves, goblets brimmed with juice, but no one ever saw a vegetable that wasn't drowned in butter, no mention of allergies, no diets, no nutrition plans. In Sorcerer's Stone, Harry was helping himself to everything he could reach. But what if a student had diabetes or needed a gluten-free meal? The house elves cooked in secret, unseen, unconsulted. Meals were magical, yes, but also mysterious, unchecked, and indulgent to the point of concern. Food was joy, but never health. And what about laundry, toothbrushes, period care? We know prefects had a special bathroom, a white-tiled room with a swimming pool-sized tub, as described in Goblet of Fire. But that was a privilege. The rest? Unmentioned. No one ever scrubbed a robe. No one packed soap or towels. Did spells clean everything? If so, who cast them? If not, did children spend 7 years learning charms with unwashed uniforms and rotting socks? Hygiene wasn't just an afterthought, it was invisible. And for a place that taught students to brew poisons and handle magical beasts, that silence was odd, maybe even dangerous. Number 13, magical creatures lived way too close to students. The whomping willow didn't grow naturally, it was planted, on purpose, in the middle of a schoolyard. A tree with violent instincts, capable of crushing bones and shattering skulls, stood right there on the Hogwarts grounds. In Prisoner of Azkaban, Ron and Harry crash into it with the flying car. The tree nearly kills them. Later, Madame Pomfrey simply scolds them for getting too close. But the question isn't why students approached it, it's why a murderous tree was ever allowed near children in the first place. In a normal school, a loose floorboard gets repaired. At Hogwarts, they feed a killer tree and call it tradition. Thestrals pulled the school carriages. You couldn't see them unless you had seen death. So when they did appear, they looked like nightmares, skeletal horses with bat-like wings and hollow eyes. "They're not scary," Luna Lovegood said gently. "They're beautiful." But that beauty came with a cost. Only students who had witnessed death could interact with them. For Harry, it was Cedric Diggory. For Luna, it was her mother. That means a traumatic event was the requirement to even see a living part of school transport. These creatures weren't evil, but placing them so close to emotionally fragile children without warning wasn't wisdom, it was neglect. Then there was Hagrid, kind-hearted, brave, and completely blind to danger. He raised a dragon in a wooden hut, smuggled blast-ended scroots into the Triwizard Tournament, brought acromantulas, giant man-eating spiders, into the Forbidden Forest. In Chamber of Secrets, Ron screams, "Follow the spiders? Why couldn't it be follow the butterflies?" It was a joke, but it came after nearly being eaten alive by Aragog's children. No adult ever punished Hagrid. No parent ever demanded his removal. It's as if Hogwarts quietly agreed the lives of magical creatures were more important than the safety of magical children. Number 14, ghosts in a school aren't exactly normal. Nearly headless, Nick waved cheerfully at first years as they stepped into the Great Hall. He floated through tables, chatted with students, and offered advice with a hollow smile. To a child he seemed harmless, like a quirky uncle who just happened to be dead. But look closer. Nick wasn't just a decoration. He was a soul bound to earth by unfinished business. His beheading went wrong. His ghostly form floated not in celebration of life, but as a reminder of pain and failure. Hogwarts invited children to share space with such spirits. No one ever asked, what does that do to a child's mind? The Bloody Baron drifted in silence through Slytherin's dungeons. Students avoided eye contact, not out of respect, out of fear. His robes were stained with silver blood. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, we finally learn why he murdered Helena Ravenclaw, the Grey Lady. He loved her. She fled. He tracked her down, stabbed her in a rage, and then killed himself. Both remained in Hogwarts. No exorcism, no distance. Just two tragic ghosts haunting the halls where 11-year-olds sleep. It's not magical. It's disturbing. The Grey Lady stood silently by the library shelves, watching students who didn't know her story. But when Harry asked, she whispered the truth. He was a baron. He wore a blood-stained cloak. He followed me. He killed me. And then she paused. My mother never knew where I had gone. This wasn't fantasy. It was grief suspended in time, a murder-suicide embedded in the architecture of a school. And the school? It normalized it, treated it like ambience, like moving staircases or enchanted ceilings. No wonder Luna felt at home there. Hogwarts blurred the line between charm and trauma. Why did no one question this? Why did no parent raise a hand and ask why their child shared living space with tortured remnants of the dead? Ghosts weren't guides, they were warnings, fragments of lives interrupted. Children looked up from their cauldrons and saw death floating by. Death with a name, a voice, a history. It was considered tradition, but tradition doesn't mean safety. And Hogwarts, for all its wonder, made death look like furniture. Number 15. Only Gryffindors ever got the glory. Of all the many oddities that emerge when rereading the Harry Potter books as an adult, one stands out more than the others. The blatant favoritism towards Gryffindor. As a child, swept up in the heroic adventures of Harry, Ron, and Hermione, this favoritism might pass unnoticed, even feel deserved. But with maturity, it becomes harder to ignore the overwhelming narrative tilt in favor of the red and gold house. Time and again, Gryffindors are the ones placed in the limelight, draped in glory, and rewarded for their actions, while students from the other houses, even those who show courage, loyalty, intelligence, or hard work, are sidelined or forgotten. It is not merely that Gryffindor students do brave things, it is that the story defines bravery almost exclusively through them, as if the other houses were incapable of anything but supporting roles. At the end of Philosopher's Stone, Dumbledore delivers his now iconic last-minute awarding of house points to Gryffindor, pushing them just past Slytherin and effectively robbing the green and silver house of a hard-earned victory. Neville Longbottom's 10 points for standing up to his friends was a sweet moment, but in retrospect, the timing feels manufactured, a dramatic flourish that overshadows the larger problem. The very idea that the entire house competition, an event that spans the school year, can be decided on the whims of the headmaster at the closing feast sets a strange precedent. It teaches that rules and systems are flexible, provided the right house needs the boost. Throughout Chamber of Secrets, it is again Gryffindors who carry the plot forward. Harry and Ron break school rules repeatedly, endanger themselves and others, and still come out as heroes. Meanwhile, Hermione, another Gryffindor, earns praise for her intellect and bravery when she brews Polyjuice Potion illegally. Yet the story never pauses to consider that other students, especially from Ravenclaw, might be doing equally impressive academic feats within the bounds of the rules. When Cho Chang is introduced, she is a skilled seeker and a member of the cleverest house, but she is reduced to a romantic interest, a background character in the greater Gryffindor drama. In Prisoner of Azkaban, the same pattern continues. The Marauder's map, the Time-Turner escapades, the bucking of authority all revolve around Gryffindors. Even when the narrative dips into the history of other houses, it does so through a Gryffindor lens. Sirius Black and Remus Lupin, both Gryffindors, are framed as tragic, misunderstood figures. Peter Pettigrew, also a Gryffindor, is the traitor. Notably absent are examples of profound complexity or development from other houses. The few times they appear, they serve the plot rather than disrupt it. Ravenclaws, Hufflepuffs and Slytherins exist mainly in the margins, props to be moved around the stage of Gryffindor-centric storytelling. The fourth book offers a more painful example of this imbalance. Cedric Diggory, a Hufflepuff, is brave, handsome, fair-minded, and kind. He is the epitome of what a Hogwarts champion should be. He is described as someone who always played fair, who was modest and good-natured. Goblet of Fire, Chapter 18. He even offers Harry advice during the Triwizard Tournament, despite the competition. And yet Cedric's death is a footnote. Though he dies a senseless, tragic death, kill the spare, Voldemort says coldly, he is quickly brushed aside. The story pivots to Harry's trauma, Dumbledore's cryptic speeches, and the coming war. Cedric's funeral is brief. His legacy is barely acknowledged. No statue, no portrait, no house-wide commemoration. Hufflepuff's brightest light extinguished and the story moves on. In contrast, consider the treatment of Dumbledore's army in Order of the Phoenix, formed by Harry, Hermione and Ron. Of course, it includes students from every house except Slytherin, and yet the narrative centers almost exclusively on the Gryffindors. Luna Lovegood, a Ravenclaw, is eccentric and brave, but she is treated as a curiosity. Zacharias Smith, a Hufflepuff, is portrayed as annoying and cowardly. When the DA battles Death Eaters in the Department of Mysteries, the focus remains firmly on the Gryffindors. Ginny, Neville, and Luna all participate, but the emotional resonance falls most heavily on Harry. Their bravery supports his story, not theirs. The seventh book's climax, the Battle of Hogwarts, makes the imbalance painfully obvious. There are acts of courage across all houses. The Pattle twins, Anthony Goldstein, Ernie Macmillan, and others stand and fight. But who is remembered? It is Neville Longbottom, the Gryffindor, who slays Nagini, deals the final blow to Voldemort's Horcruxes, and delivers the iconic rallying speech. Even in the movie adaptation, it is Gryffindor banners that fly at the final celebration. The House Cup, once a central tradition of school life, is abandoned altogether. There is no mention of Ravenclaw's knowledge, Hufflepuff's loyalty, or Slytherin's cunning aiding in the battle. In fact, most Slytherins are evacuated before the fight begins, casting them as cowards en masse. Few, like Slughorn, return to help, but these actions are treated more as exceptions than part of a broader pattern of house unity. The portrayal of Slytherin is perhaps the most glaring symptom of this imbalance. While Gryffindors are consistently painted as brave and righteous, Slytherins are often the antagonists, or at best morally grey. Draco Malfoy, a complex character struggling with family pressure and inner conflict, is reduced to a sneering foil for much of the series. When he shows fear and hesitation in Half-Blood Prince preparing to kill Dumbledore, there is a brief moment of humanity, but this is quickly overshadowed by the dramatic death scene and Snape's "I am the Half-Blood Prince" revelation. Draco's internal battle is not explored with the same compassion granted to Harry, or even to Sirius. Snape, the ultimate double agent, is a Slytherin whose entire arc revolves around love, sacrifice, and loyalty, traits more often associated with Hufflepuff. He dies to protect Harry and to uphold a promise made out of love. Yet the final tribute, "You have your mother's eyes," diminishes his story to a footnote in Harry's. Snape's Slytherin identity, with all its contradictions, is never truly celebrated. Even in death, he is not honored with the same reverence granted to Dumbledore or even Sirius. There is no moment where the school gathers to acknowledge his contributions. His portrait is not even hung in the headmaster's office until Harry insists upon it. The cursed child. Number 16. Spellcasting lessons were ridiculously casual. In their first charms class, Harry Potter and his classmates were introduced to the spell Wingardium Leviosa with a flourish of a wand and a simple command. Professor Flitwick, perched on a stack of books to see over his desk, chirped directions to the children. "Swish and flick, remember, swish and flick, and enunciate clearly, Wingardium Leviosa." The students giggled and fumbled, and Ron Weasley, in frustration, mocked Hermione's precise pronunciation before accidentally breaking a feather. The incident was amusing at the time, but revisiting it from a more mature perspective reveals a deeply troubling truth. Children were learning spells with barely any understanding of the dangers involved. There were no safety goggles, no protective wards, no clear warning about what could go wrong. The Hogwarts curriculum treated magic not as a powerful force needing cautious handling, but more like a schoolyard game with a Latin twist. This casual attitude extended far beyond Flitwick's classroom. Consider Defense Against the Dark Arts. In Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, Gilderoy Lockhart's idea of education involved releasing a cage full of Cornish pixies into the classroom. These creatures, though often depicted as mischievous, were capable of destruction and chaos. The result? Books shredded, ears pulled, Neville Longbottom suspended by the cloak from a chandelier. Lockhart merely fled, leaving students to fend for themselves. It was a slapstick scene on the surface, but what if a student had suffered a concussion or broken a limb? At no point did Lockhart perform precautionary spells, nor did he explain how to neutralize the threat beforehand. This was a teacher entrusted with the education and safety of children, and the school had hired him without verifying his qualifications. The message was clear: magical education at Hogwarts was often improvised, experimental, and dangerously unstructured. The lack of consistency in teaching was not confined to bad teachers. Even capable professors like McGonagall followed practices that today would raise alarms. In Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, the first-year Transfiguration class featured a demonstration where McGonagall turned her desk into a pig. This, undoubtedly impressive, was followed by instructions for the students to attempt transforming matchsticks into needles. What the children were never told was how to manage magical accidents, how to reverse unintended transformations, or even what magical exhaustion felt like. No lessons on magical ethics, no theoretical understanding of molecular magical shift, no explanation of what would happen if the spell misfired and embedded itself into the caster's wand or skin. It was all trial and error, and the errors could be terrifying. Seamus Finnegan became a running gag throughout the series due to his spells routinely exploding in his face. In Philosopher's Stone, his attempt to turn water into rum ended with a minor explosion. The problem was never truly addressed. Instead of analyzing why Seamus was having such a difficult time, or checking for wand incompatibility or magical dysregulation, the incidents were laughed off. The class moved on. This behavior wasn't simply careless, it was institutional neglect. In any modern system of education, repeated magical accidents would trigger reviews, counseling, retraining. At Hogwarts, they became punchlines. When Harry learned the Patronus charm in Prisoner of Azkaban, it was under Professor Lupin's guidance, and even then, the lesson structure was, in essence, a controlled exposure to a magical creature capable of inducing suicidal despair. The Dementor simulation was performed using a boggart, which was safer than the real thing, but the emotional and psychological toll on Harry was undeniable. He fainted repeatedly. Rather than consider the possibility that the child needed recovery, Lupin encouraged him to keep going. "You're not weak, Harry," he said, trying to boost the boy's morale. But the underlying issue remained. A 13-year-old was being asked to develop high-level magical defenses with no therapist, no debrief, no mental health protocol in place. Even worse, many spells were passed among students without any adult supervision whatsoever. In Half-Blood Prince, Harry discovers the advanced potion-making book once owned by the mysterious Half-Blood Prince. The margins of this book contained handwritten instructions for spells far beyond a student's level. The most dangerous was Sectum Sempra, a curse that caused violent slashing wounds to the victim. Harry used it on Draco Malfoy during a duel in the bathroom, not knowing what the spell would do. The results were horrifying. Blood poured from Draco's body as though invisible swords had sliced him. Snape rushed in to stop the bleeding, but the fact remains, Harry was never warned that these kinds of spells could circulate within the school, let alone what to do if he accidentally cast one. The castle's walls echoed with secrets, and those secrets were often deadly. Meanwhile, the notion of magical duels as part of student life was treated more like a fun extracurricular than a potentially lethal discipline. In Chamber of Secrets, a dueling club is launched by Lockhart and Snape. No real safety barriers, no enforced spell limits, and no trained medical staff on standby. When Harry accidentally speaks Parseltongue to a snake conjured during a duel, the incident devolves into chaos. The entire club was a spectacle, not a learning environment. The students were being taught to cast spells at one another without any discussion of magical restraint, escalation, or appropriate contexts. It was performance, not pedagogy. There was no standardization in spell instruction. Different professors taught similar subjects with wildly varying methods. In Order of the Phoenix, Umbridge refused to allow any practical defense against the dark arts instruction, relying solely on theory. This approach was an overcorrection to the otherwise dangerous hands-on approach, but it shows a crucial problem. Hogwarts lacked a coherent school-wide curriculum. There were no magical exams tied to performance outcomes across the board. Other than the Albuels and Newties, there was no continuity. A student might learn a spell from Flitwick one way, only to be told by another professor later that the incantation or wand movement was wrong. Who was right? There was no magical version of peer-reviewed consistency, no educational board ensuring quality or agreement. Number 17. One school nurse for hundreds of students? In the enchanted world of Hogwarts, where portraits whispered secrets and staircases shifted of their own will, there existed a curious and often overlooked contradiction. The magical school's approach to health and healing was, by all adult standards, wildly insufficient. When you're 11 and reading about broken bones vanishing with a gulp of scalar grow, it feels wondrous. But revisiting the same stories years later, a more unsettling truth emerges. Hogwarts, despite its age and prestige, operated with a medical system that bordered on negligence. Madame Poppy Pomfrey, the school's only known matron, was a figure of efficiency and maternal strictness. She was very strict about visitors and very stern about bed rest, as Harry Potter learned early on in his years at the school. And yet, as competent and dedicated as she was, it becomes clear with time that she was the only medical professional on staff. The lone line of defense between students and the many magical and sometimes fatal threats that plagued the castle. No assistants, no specialized healers, no on-call experts from St. Mungo's, just Pomfrey. The matter would be trivial if Hogwarts had been a normal school with the occasional scraped knee or seasonal flu. But Hogwarts was a place where students were regularly hexed, jinxed, or cursed. They played a violent, full-contact sport in mid-air. There were trolls in the dungeons, killer trees on the grounds, and dark artifacts scattered like hidden mines across the halls. It wasn't unusual for a child to end up in the hospital wing with a cursed limb, or no bones at all, as Gilderoy Lockhart demonstrated in The Chamber of Secrets, when he accidentally removed all the bones in Harry's arm. Pomfrey's response: administer Scalar Grow, a potion so painful it made Harry wince in agony all night. The solution was effective, but the circumstances were grotesquely casual. Consider the events of the Goblet of Fire, when the Triwizard Tournament was hosted at Hogwarts. 3 extremely dangerous tasks, one of which involved swimming in an icy lake surrounded by merpeople, and another where dragons were flown in to battle teenagers. During the second task, students watched as champions were submerged underwater for nearly an hour. "They're all right," Dumbledore had said with calm reassurance. But who, apart from Pomfrey, would have been prepared if something had gone wrong? Who would have healed a punctured lung, a severed artery, or brain damage from lack of oxygen? One healer for a crowd of hundreds. That was the extent of the system. Even during the basilisk attacks in the Chamber of Secrets, the medical system seemed shockingly under-resourced. Several students, including Hermione Granger, were petrified into a near-death stasis. Colin Creevey, Justin Finch-Fletchley, nearly headless Nick, and Penelope Clearwater all lay frozen. Pomfrey preserved them, yes, but did not, or could not, revive them. Everyone had to wait until Professor Snape's stock of mandrakes matured. "It'll be another month," Professor Sprout had said, "but once they're ready, we'll be able to revive those who've been petrified." A month. Imagine the public outrage if children in a boarding school today were left catatonic for weeks because the only available antidote was delayed due to gardening. And what about psychological trauma? Hogwarts faced multiple large-scale crises during Harry's years there. Students were exposed to death, torture, and isolation. In Order of the Phoenix, Harry suffered from nightmares, possession, and the emotional fallout of Cedric Diggory's murder, and yet no mention is made of a counselor, psychologist, or even a comforting adult, apart from Dumbledore, who was unavailable for most of the book. Madame Pomfrey could mend bones, but she was not trained, nor expected, to mend minds. In fact, the closest the school came to offering therapeutic intervention was when Professor Lupin handed Harry chocolate after a Dementor attack. "Eat it, it'll help," he said. While chocolate may offer some comfort, it is hardly a sufficient response to a creature that literally drains happiness and causes victims to relive their worst memories. Dementor exposure should have warranted emergency care, even hospitalization, but at Hogwarts it was treated like a bad dream and a candy bar. The use of catch-all potions like Pepper-Up and Skilligro was also telling. They appeared to function as magical panaceas, and yet their preparation and administration were never questioned. What if a student had an allergic reaction to an ingredient? What about dosage, long-term side effects, or magical interactions with other potions? The Potter books never dive into these complexities. But in real life, even the most experienced doctors wouldn't dream of treating dozens of distinct illnesses with a single bottle. There is also the issue of magical injuries being underestimated. In Half-Blood Prince, Katie Bell is cursed by a necklace meant to assassinate Dumbledore. She is lifted into the air, screaming in agony before crashing to the ground. Pomfrey stabilizes her, but the final recovery takes place at St. Mungo's. If this injury required hospital-grade care, what other cases had she been expected to treat alone that actually exceeded school capacity? Remus Lupin's monthly transformation into a werewolf offers another disturbing glimpse. Each full moon, he endured what was likely a traumatic and physically damaging event, and yet it's never indicated that Pomfrey had assistance or that Lupin himself received adequate medical or emotional care. It simply stated that she would escort him to the Shrieking Shack and care for him afterwards. Alone. The absurdity becomes even more evident in The Philosopher's Stone, where Harry ends up in the hospital wing after a Quidditch match. His broom had been jinxed, and he crashed violently to the ground. Pomfrey healed his injuries, yes. But in a normal school, the event would have triggered an investigation, parent notification, and possibly a review of safety protocols. At Hogwarts, the incident is chalked up to another day on the pitch. Number 18, the library hid more than it revealed. The Hogwarts library, cloaked in candlelight and the scent of worn parchment, was more than a storehouse of ancient wisdom. It was a paradox, a sanctuary of learning that seemed, curiously, designed to restrict learning. On the surface, it appeared majestic and open, shelf after shelf of spellbooks, grimoires, and magical encyclopedias whispered with centuries of accumulated knowledge. But as one grew older, as the blind admiration faded into awareness, something darker emerged. The library hid more than it revealed, and those secrets had consequences. Hermione Granger was the best example, a top student, relentless in pursuit of information, and even she had to break the rules. In their first year, she whispered to Harry and Ron, "I had to sneak into the restricted section last night. I used my invisibility cloak." This wasn't academic misconduct born of rebellion. It was necessity. She needed answers that the ordinary shelves wouldn't give and permission wouldn't provide. The trio's life often depended on facts tucked behind magical barriers and bureaucratic red tape. The restricted section was the clearest symbol of this problem. Books that could help students understand dangerous magic, defend themselves against the dark arts, or simply fill the glaring gaps in their coursework were kept under lock and spell, not behind glass, not with warning signs, but actually sealed by enchantments. You needed a professor's signed note just to see them. The assumption was that students couldn't be trusted with knowledge, yet they were expected to survive in a world brimming with curses, magical beasts, and blood wars. This contradiction lay at the heart of Hogwarts' design. Consider Harry's second year. The school was under siege from the unknown horror that petrified students one by one. The trio suspected the answer lay in some forgotten creature. Hermione, again acting as the unofficial researcher for the group, borrowed Moster Potenti potions, another book hidden in the restricted section. This book gave them instructions on brewing Polyjuice Potion. It was the only way to get close to Malfoy and uncover potential clues, but instead of being offered help or a safer path, they had to resort to theft, potion making in a bathroom, and risking expulsion. Why wasn't this information more accessible in times of danger? What made the situation more bizarre was that Hogwarts itself was deeply unsafe. The Forbidden Forest, moving staircases, secret tunnels, and even the Triwizard Tournament showed how frequently students were placed in mortal danger. In that context, limiting access to information wasn't just restrictive, it was reckless. A school that normalized life-threatening events should have trained its students better, and the primary place for that training should have been the library. The architecture of knowledge in Hogwarts was nonsensical. There was no clear organization by year-level, magical category, or even by purpose. No magical search system, no librarian assistance beyond a scowling Madam Pince. The Dewey Decimal System may have been Muggle, but it at least gave readers a roadmap. In Hogwarts, navigation depended on luck and prior knowledge, two things most 11-year-olds don't have. How did a student even know what to look for? Let's not forget that Hermione, the brightest witch of her age, had to memorize obscure book titles and locate them manually. In the Philosopher's Stone, she said, "I checked this out weeks ago for a bit of light reading." She often relied on sheer memory to trace references. That method worked for Hermione barely. For others, the disorganization meant entire areas of magic might as well have not existed. If you didn't already know about Horcruxes, how could you begin to research them? The case of Horcruxes was particularly damning. Tom Riddle asked Professor Slughorn about them, but not even Dumbledore would provide clarity. The only book that discussed them was hidden so deeply, it took Dumbledore himself to retrieve it from the Room of Requirement. Think about that. The knowledge to destroy Voldemort was concealed, not just physically, but philosophically. The ideology was, this is too dark for young minds. But isn't it more dangerous to let dark magic remain a mystery? Dumbledore, for all his wisdom, perpetuated the secrecy. He doled out knowledge like a rationed elixir, just enough to keep Harry moving, never enough to empower him fully. Why? Because he believed in the balance of burden and growth, yet this philosophy ignored a crucial truth: people die from ignorance. Sirius Black's death, Cedric's, even Dobby's. These weren't just the result of Voldemort's violence, but of systemic silence. Had Harry been better educated, had he known about certain curses or magical tools earlier, Outcomes could have changed. Even the Time Turner incident pointed to institutional contradictions. Hermione was given one to attend more classes, not to correct historical catastrophes or rescue lives. But when she and Harry used it to save Buckbeak and Sirius, it was both a miracle and an unintentional indictment of the Ministry and Hogwarts. Time travel, accessible through bureaucracy but not through knowledge. The spell wasn't taught, the rules weren't explained, the students, again, had to improvise. There was also a moral component. Magic wasn't just a tool, it shaped character. But Hogwarts failed to educate its students on the philosophical underpinnings of spells. What did it mean to obliviate someone? What were the long-term consequences of mind-altering charms like the Imperious Curse? None of these were addressed in the curriculum. You had to learn them by accident or from books that you weren't allowed to read. The result was a generation of wizards dangerously underprepared for ethical complexity. The school's attitude toward Muggleborns added another layer. These students, unfamiliar with magical heritage, had the steepest learning curve. Yet Hogwarts didn't compensate for that. Hermione succeeded in spite of the system, not because of it. She filled in the blanks through obsessive study, constant anxiety, and frequent rule-breaking. The library could have been her great equalizer, but instead it was a maze of barriers. Even Madame Pince, the gatekeeper of knowledge, symbolized this problem. Described as a thin, irritable woman who looked like an underfed vulture, she didn't help students. She guarded books. She punished curiosity. In The Half-Blood Prince, when Harry scribbled in a textbook, she was enraged. Not because of damage, but because someone dared to interact with the sacred texts differently. The books were relics, not resources. That attitude infected the whole institution. Contrast this with the Room of Requirement. It gave Harry what he needed: space, tools, and even access to books. It adapted to student needs. The library, in theory, should have done the same. But Hogwarts wasn't built to encourage personal academic growth. It was a legacy institution. It taught what it had always taught, and it feared change, feared letting go of control. Students were apprentices, not thinkers. The culture of secrecy extended to professors. Lupin didn't explain his condition. Snape concealed his intentions behind bitterness. McGonagall offered discipline, not guidance. Teachers hoarded their knowledge as if it were a currency. Only Dumbledore sometimes broke the pattern, and even then, too little, too late. His lessons with Harry in The Half-Blood Prince were the first time structured magical history was actually taught, 6 years too late. In one moment of rare honesty, Dumbledore admitted, "You are protected, in short, by your ability to love." It was poetic, but also troubling. Love might be a powerful magic, but it isn't a spell. Where was the class on emotional defense, on resisting manipulation, on processing grief? In a world where love could save lives, it was never part of the curriculum. The Mirror of Erist, another artifact left unexplained, symbolized this neglect. It showed deep desires, but no one explained its psychological danger. Dumbledore warned Harry not to dwell, but the mirror remained accessible. No books covered it. No professors guided students on magical artifacts. Learning was a solitary journey, often interrupted by superstition, fear, or censorship. Ironically, the Dark Wizards always seemed better educated. Voldemort read deeply. He experimented, he asked questions, he challenged norms. Hogwarts bred obedience. The library could have been a place where young minds explored safely, where dangerous knowledge was contextualized, not hidden. Instead, it bred recklessness, because when knowledge is denied, desperation grows, and desperate students take desperate measures. There's one more painful example. In Order of the Phoenix, Harry dreams of the Department of Mysteries, a place representing all the magic Hogwarts avoids: time, thought, death, love, and space. These were the great themes of existence, and yet none had a syllabus, none were discussed in class. The very word unspeakable meant, "You may not learn this." And so when students entered that space, they were children pretending to be warriors. Looking back, Hogwarts wasn't a school in the modern sense. It was a rite of passage disguised as education. Survival, not scholarship, was its true curriculum. The library should have been its heart. Instead, it was its secret, a towering labyrinth that offered just enough knowledge to pass exams, but not enough to change the world. For that, you had to break the rules, or, like Hermione, rewrite them. Number 19, open discrimination against Muggle-borns. In your childhood readings, Hogwarts felt like a place of wonder, mischief, and magical learning. But as you grow older and revisit the same pages, something unsettling begins to form between the lines. Beneath the excitement of spells and house rivalries lies a more disturbing truth. The institution that taught transfiguration and defense against the dark arts had, in truth, no defense against one of the darkest arts of all, prejudice. Nowhere is this clearer than in the school's quiet complicity in the discrimination against Muggle-born students. Take Hermione Granger, brilliant, brave, relentlessly curious, and yet marked from her first year with a label that carried the weight of centuries of magical bigotry. She is called Mudblood in her second year, and not in whispers. Draco Malfoy, standing confidently in the open air, utters it with a venom that cuts through the moment. "You'll be next, Mudbloods." And this wasn't just an insult. It was a slur charged with historical hate, rooted in an ideology that considered Muggle-borns as inferior. The word alone should have sparked outrage, intervention, or at the very least, some formal action from Hogwarts staff. But there wasn't a single detention or official reprimand from any adult who heard about it. Not even Professor McGonagall, fierce though she was, took tangible steps to address it. The scene where Draco calls Hermione a mudblood happens in the presence of others. Ron reacts viscerally, vomiting slugs as a result of a backfired curse meant to punish Draco, but it's not Ron's misfire that lingers. It's the lack of any adult presence stepping in to frame this as unacceptable. One might argue that children will be cruel, but in a school like Hogwarts, where every corridor is watched by ghosts and portraits, and where professors wield the power to transfigure students into matchboxes, how was such behavior allowed to echo without consequence? In fact, when prejudice occurs in the classroom, it often goes unchecked. Consider Professor Snape, who is notoriously cold toward Hermione. While Snape had his own complicated past and traumas, it's undeniable that he allowed Malfoy and other pure-blood students to taunt Muggle-borns freely. His silence wasn't just an act of neutrality, it was tacit approval. When Draco ridiculed Hermione for her background or her teeth, Snape at best ignored it. At worst, he encouraged the humiliation. In Goblet of Fire, when Hermione's teeth are hexed by Draco, Snape coldly says, "I see no difference," instead of helping her. The remark is cruel, made even more so by the knowledge that Hermione is in pain, both physically and emotionally. What's more telling is that Hogwarts, a school of such rich tradition and magical legacy, never once integrated any educational program or curriculum that addressed the rights of Muggle-borns. There was no history class that explained the origins of this prejudice, no lecture on equality, no celebration of magical diversity. Instead, lessons leaned into the achievements of purebloods, with portraits of old, grim-looking wizards lining the halls, many of whom likely held the same views as the Malfoys. The silence of history is deafening, and in that silence, Muggle-borns were left to fight their battles alone. Even the Sorting Hat, revered as an ancient magical artifact, appears to carry biases rooted in a feudal worldview. Its songs speak of noble founders and house traits, but where is the guidance for inclusivity? Where is the recognition that magical ability has no bloodline? The hat places students like Hermione, a paragon of intellect, into Gryffindor, not Ravenclaw, which may have suited her academic inclinations better. One wonders whether that decision came from courage or from a need to separate the outsider from the studious elite. In contrast, Draco is placed in Slytherin with ease, despite the house's known exclusivity and disdain for Muggle heritage. The hat, for all its wisdom, never challenges those notions. Then there's the issue of the student body. Muggleborns are routinely outnumbered, isolated, and misunderstood. There's no Muggleborn student union, no group or professor assigned to mentor them through the cultural transition into a world they were not raised in. There's no counselor who guides them through the maze of customs and historical tensions. They arrive at Platform 934 like tourists stepping into a hidden society, one with rules, alliances, and grudges they never asked to inherit. Hermione had to teach herself about Hogwarts and the magical world before even attending. Her obsessive reading of Hogwarts: A History isn't just a personality quirk, it's a survival mechanism. In the classroom, ignorance becomes dangerous. Muggle-born students are often subjected to lessons that make no effort to contextualize their understanding. When Professor Binns recounts the Goblin Rebellions or the origins of the Statute of Secrecy, he does so with monotony, without offering Muggle-born students the chance to bridge the gap between their world and this one. The school doesn't supply materials to catch them up, no books that say, "So you're new to magic," a beginner's guide for Muggle-borns. Everything assumes a baseline of magical knowledge, a baseline that only pure-blood or half-blood students possess. When the Chamber of Secrets is opened in Hermione's second year, and the attacks begin, the prejudice intensifies. The legend says the monster targets Muggle-born, and the students know this. They whisper and look around, suspicion falling like fog across the corridors. Muggle-borns like Hermione become literal targets of a dark ideology manifesting in physical violence. And again, where is the institutional protection? Where are the assemblies, the warnings, the protective enchantments? The staff reacts only after victims are found and petrified, frozen in horror. The school reacts, but never prepares. The case of Justin Finch Fletchley is another example. A Muggle-born Hufflepuff, he is attacked by the basilisk and nearly dies. Afterward, there is no recorded conversation with him about what happened, no trauma counseling, no disciplinary hearing about how students were targeted based on blood status. Hogwarts simply continues, its gears grinding forward, unaffected by the blood feud threatening its walls. Justin's fear before his attack is palpable, especially after learning that Slytherin's monster targets Muggle-borns. Yet no adult steps in to reassure or protect him. He is a background victim, forgotten as quickly as he was introduced. In contrast, consider how the school reacts when a pureblood is endangered. In Half-Blood Prince, when Katie Bell is cursed and nearly dies, the school is thrown into alarm. Dumbledore investigates. McGonagall becomes fiercely protective. But when Muggle-born students are insulted, hexed, or petrified, the same urgency does not arise. Their suffering is normalized. This double standard speaks volumes about who Hogwarts protects and who it allows to be collateral damage. It is important to recall that even the teachers were not immune to bias. Professor Slughorn, for instance, favors students from influential wizarding families. He welcomes Hermione into the Slug Club, but not without hesitation. Her talent outweighs her blood status, but it's still an exception, not a rule. He glows when talking about the parents of students like Blaise Zabini or Cormac McLagan, but never asks about Hermione's dentist parents. Prestige in Slughorn's world is measured by magical legacy, not merit. The Ministry of Magic, too, infects the school's values. Dolores Umbridge's appointment as High Inquisitor is the most blatant expression of institutionalized bias. Under her rule, the school takes a sharp, authoritarian turn, and blood status becomes more than just an insult. It becomes a weapon. Her quill draws blood from Harry's hand, but her policies cut deeper for Muggle-borns. Her regime doesn't invent prejudice, it legitimizes it. The fact that the Ministry could so easily control Hogwarts speaks to the school's failure to protect its students from external ideological rot. Even in moments of triumph, the scars remain. When the trio defeats Voldemort, the victory is not a full healing. the school never publicly addresses the discrimination Muggleborns endured. There's no reform, no institutional reckoning, no stated apology. It is implied that change might come, but it is never shown. Hogwarts moves forward, but it never looks back to examine its own role in enabling prejudice. One might argue that Dumbledore's presence should have shielded the vulnerable, and while he does defend Hermione at times, he remains curiously passive on larger systemic issues. His love for Muggleborns is personal, not structural. He encourages Harry to be kind but does not overhaul the curriculum to teach anti-prejudice. He allows Snape to bully Hermione for years. He never publicly condemns the use of mudblood, nor does he create protections around those most often targeted by that word. There's something particularly haunting about the fact that Voldemort himself was a half-blood, yet obsessed with blood purity. This irony is lost on the school's broader culture, which continues to revere pure bloodlines without critical thought. The Death Eaters didn't emerge from a vacuum. They were shaped in places like Hogwarts, where prejudice festered unchecked. The hallways and classrooms filled with rivalry and silence served as an unspoken crucible for hate. Even the ghosts, with their centuries of existence, never confront these divisions. The Bloody Baron says nothing. The Fat Friar hums benignly, nearly headless. Nick makes no attempt to guide the young toward tolerance. The ghosts, like the walls of the castle, are witnesses to history, but not participants in change. The portraits on the walls, living echoes of powerful witches and wizards, are the same. Their opinions remain firmly rooted in the past, echoing elitism and blood pride. They offer no guidance to the Muggle-born student wandering past them alone in thought, aching to belong. The magical world may have advanced in charms and spells, but socially Hogwarts is frozen in time. What remains most disturbing is the normalization of all this. For readers, especially young ones, the discrimination is dressed up as rivalry, as mere insults. But as you grow older, you begin to recognize the depth and danger behind the words. Mudblood is not just a name, it's a history, a curse, a weapon. And Hogwarts, for all its charm and mystery, let that weapon remain in circulation, polished not with magic, but with silence. Number 20. Hogwarts had zero real security. In the flickering torchlight of Hogwarts' winding corridors, danger was not a stranger. It lurked in shadows, whispered through moving staircases, and sometimes slithered unseen through the pipes beneath the floor. One would expect a magical school, especially one housing underage witches and wizards, to be fortified like a stronghold. Instead, Hogwarts operated like a dream half-remembered, beautiful but illogical. Time and again, the lives of children were placed at risk, not through the chaos of war or rebellion, but through the very architecture of their education. In Harry Potter's second year, a basilisk prowled the school, an ancient serpent capable of killing with a single glance, loosed by Tom Riddle through the Chamber of Secrets. For months, it moved unseen, paralyzing students and ghosts alike. And the response? Whispers, rumors, and a terrified silence. No sweeping lockdown, no intensive searches. The creature was allowed to roam. Professors were worried, certainly, but the structure of school life continued, a few classes cancelled, but no mass evacuations. Dumbledore himself was temporarily removed, and that was considered sufficient, as if the absence of a headmaster could neutralize a lethal beast bred for murder. Even when Ginny Weasley disappeared into the chamber, presumed dead, the students remained in the castle. No auras stormed the grounds. Instead, two professors, Lockhart and Snape's reluctant help, ventured forth a farce of a rescue. The true heroes were children. Harry and Ron descended into darkness, not with orders, but because no adult dared to act. What does it say about a school's safety protocols when 12-year-olds are more decisive than the entire staff? Argus Filch, the caretaker, was responsible for discipline, a squib born to magical parents but possessing no magic of his own. He walked the halls with a lantern and a cat. In a castle teeming with sentient staircases, vanishing rooms, and ghosts that could walk through walls, Filch was practically invisible to the forces he was meant to control. The Marauders map, created by pranksters, could track every soul in the castle, yet Hogwarts itself had no equivalent. No magical surveillance system, no enchantments alerting professors to dark magic, hidden creatures, or infiltrators. Only tradition, and tradition rarely updated itself. In the third year, Dementors were stationed around the school grounds, hooded wraiths that fed on despair, whose very presence could traumatize the strongest mind. They were brought in to capture Sirius Black, a presumed murderer, but they floated close to students, drew their breath from the edges of Quidditch pitches, and once swooped on Harry during a game, sending him plummeting from the sky. These were creatures known to have no discrimination between victim and criminal. And yet they guarded children. Dumbledore protested, but the Ministry insisted. That should have been the moment Hogwarts drew a line. Instead, students were warned not to provoke them, as if their trauma were a matter of personal discipline. Time and again, students were left to fend for themselves. In their fourth year, the Triwizard Tournament was resurrected, despite a history of fatalities so brutal the event had been banned for centuries. And while rules claimed that no underage student could be entered, Harry's name emerged from the Goblet of Fire, magically binding him to compete. Rather than annul the match, the staff accepted it. No serious investigation, no possibility of withdrawing a 14-year-old from a competition involving dragons, merpeople, and deadly mazes. The rules are clear, Barty Crouch insisted, yet no one asked how the rules had been broken in the first place. No protections, no consideration for psychological trauma. The games began. One of the tournament tasks involved a maze that morphed and attacked. Inside it, Harry and Cedric were transported to a graveyard, portcade by a trap set by Voldemort himself. There was no security check on the trophy, no spell to detect unauthorized magic. Cedric Diggory died, a Hogwarts student murdered in cold blood. And though Dumbledore warned of Voldemort's return, the school reopened the following year, as if nothing had happened. There were no sweeping changes, no defensive reinforcements. The Ministry installed Dolores Umbridge to keep Dumbledore in check, not to protect the students. Her reign became one of cruelty and censorship, but not once did it focus on securing the grounds. In that same year, when Dumbledore's army trained in secret, the Room of Requirement provided all the tools they needed, a room that appeared only when someone truly needed it and could take the form of anything. A miracle of magical architecture, but also a terrifying loophole. If Harry and his friends could use it for training, why not a dark wizard for murder? Why not a Death Eater for gathering weapons? The castle's very magic was neutral. It served intent, not morality. Hogwarts had no enchantments to monitor its own rooms or track unauthorized magical gatherings. The responsibility fell again on children. By sixth year, the Death Eaters infiltrated the castle through a vanishing cabinet. Draco Malfoy, a 16-year-old, found a way to bypass all magical protections by repairing a cabinet hidden in the Room of Requirement. The entire defense of Hogwarts was undone by a secret door, and when the attackers came, they moved freely through the corridors. They cursed, killed, and maimed. Dumbledore was murdered on the astronomy tower. He died under the stars while Death Eaters escaped untouched. The school was supposed to be the safest place in the wizarding world, and yet its leader fell in silence, surrounded by students asleep in their beds. The security was always reactive, never preventive. After every incident, fear surged, conversations were held, but no long-term strategies emerged. By seventh year, the school was occupied. Death Eaters patrolled the halls as teachers. The Carrows tortured students, taught dark arts, and used Crucio as discipline. Parents were terrified, but most lacked the power to intervene. The castle had become a prison. And yet this didn't require some new, dark spell. It happened because the foundation of security had never been sound. From the beginning, Hogwarts was vulnerable. Even earlier, in the first book, a three-headed dog guarded a trap door inside a school. Fluffy was part of the defense of the Philosopher's Stone, hidden beneath the castle. Students discovered it by accident. There were devil's snare vines, flying keys with slicing wings, and a deadly game of wizard chess, all lurking beneath their feet, a labyrinth of death puzzles. It was meant to keep the stone safe from Voldemort, but children reached the final chamber. Not Voldemort, not a trained dark wizard, 3 11-year-olds. Throughout Harry's education, the answer was always to let things play out. Trust the children's instincts, trust their bravery. But bravery is no replacement for security. In a world where memory can be erased with a spell, where bodies can be vanished, where illusions can deceive the eye, it is reckless to allow children to roam a fortress built on secrets. And Hogwarts was full of secrets. Hidden passageways, paintings that led to forbidden places, staircases that changed direction mid-step. Every corner could lead to salvation or death. The Forbidden Forest was exactly that, off-limits. But it bordered the grounds, visible from the windows, a place of centaurs, werewolves, and Aragog's family of man-eating spiders. And yet, detention could include a trip into those woods. In the first book, Harry and Draco were sent into the forest at night, alone, but for Hagrid and Fang. They encountered a hooded figure drinking unicorn blood, Voldemort again, but no consequences followed, no new rules, no stricter boundaries, just a return to normalcy, as if horror were part of the curriculum. The ghosts of the castle provided more mystery than protection. Peeves, the poltergeist, actively worked against order, smashing objects, causing chaos. Filch despised him, but could do nothing. Professors ignored him. He was a fixture of the school's personality, a charming bit of madness. But in moments of crisis, he was another obstacle. The ghosts were wise, sure, but limited. They could not touch, could not fight. In times of real danger, they were spectators. The castle was enchanted, alive in some ways, but woefully passive. Even magical creatures were given more liberty than reason allowed. Thestrals roamed the edges of the forest. Hippogriffs were brought into class. Blast-ended scroots, dangerous and barely understood, were raised by Hagrid. Educational freedom is one thing, but risking limbs and lives for the sake of fascination is another. Buckbeak attacked Draco not out of malice, but pride. But what if the victim had been a first year? What if the cut had been deeper? There were no counsellors, no healers beyond Madame Pomfrey. She was remarkable, yes, but she was one woman to tend hundreds. Mental health, trauma, grief, all passed over. After Cedric died, there was no grief counselling, no assemblies. The students were left to whisper among themselves. After Sirius died, Harry's breakdown was quiet, unseen. The adults meant well, but they were often distracted, chasing larger battles. The emotional lives of children were secondary. And so the legend of Hogwarts persisted, a place of wonder, of friendship, of magic. But behind the enchantment were stone walls that watched silently as children wept, as blood stained the floors, as fate twisted their young lives. There was always a sense that the castle itself had a will, that it protected those it favoured, but that protection was whimsical, not strategic. It saved when it wished, it punished when it pleased, and sometimes it simply did nothing. When Harry walked into the great hall for the first time, enchanted candles floated above their heads. House banners glowed. Food appeared by magic. It was breathtaking, but that beauty became a kind of illusion, a veil that hid the truth. Hogwarts was never safe. It was never secure. It survived not through design, but luck, heroism, and the stubbornness of children who refused to die quietly. The strange thing is that we accept it as adults, because the magic was powerful enough to make us forget until we remember. Number 21, life skills. What life skills? Of all the magical mysteries within Hogwarts, one unsettling truth emerges only when readers return as adults: the complete absence of household education. No curriculum in homemaking, hygiene, or practical survival exists at the most famous magical school in the wizarding world. Students arrive at age 11, emotionally fragile, barely past childhood, and are expected to survive not just dangerous magical creatures and enchanted staircases, but also the quiet, gnawing responsibility of growing up without being taught how to manage life's basics. In the Muggle world, schools often include cooking classes, personal hygiene lectures, or at least workshops in textile care. Hogwarts, not a whisper of such lessons, even in times of peace. The school lavishes its attention on the complexities of transfiguration and the theory of wand movements, yet never pauses to explain how a young witch might fix a torn cloak without magic or tend to a cold. One might expect, perhaps, that magic replaces these needs, but that would be a false comfort. In truth, the lack of instruction creates blind spots, and the consequences are visible in the small, quiet struggles of the students. Ron Weasley, for instance, comes from a large family, where his mother manages the household almost entirely on her own, enchanted knitting needles and all. At school, Ron is utterly dependent on the castle's infrastructure. He never once appears to know how to prepare a meal or mend his robes. In Goblet of Fire, when the Yule Ball approaches, he ends up with hand-me-down dress robes covered in lace and smelling of old attic, his embarrassment highlighting not just his poverty, but his helplessness in fixing it. Hermione Granger, the brightest witch of her age, excels in almost every academic subject. She brews Polyjuice Potion in a bathroom and solves complex magical riddles, but nowhere in the 7 books does she show any command of domestic magic. When she explains that house elves are mistreated, it comes from a moral high ground, not practical knowledge. She knows they cook, clean, and even iron the clothes of the students, but she never steps in to learn their techniques. In Order of the Phoenix, Hermione attempts to knit hats for the house elves, but her plan is clumsy, and her hats are described as wonky and lumpy, suggesting a lack of even basic skills in knitting. This becomes a subtle tragedy of the narrative, an intelligent young woman who cannot stitch a proper cap. There is no mention of laundry rooms in the castle, no scenes of students folding clothes, no casual references to cleaning spells taught in first year. And yet the students wear spotless uniforms each day. Who cleans up the mud after a rainy Quidditch practice? Who tidies the chaos of a dormitory filled with restless hormonal teenagers? The answer is house elves, working invisibly beneath the castle. Dobby's desire to be freed and paid for his labor is met with astonishment because most students have never even thought about the creatures who sustain their comfort. Their ignorance is learned, it is structural. No professor teaches them otherwise. Weekends at Hogwarts are mysteriously vague in their depiction. In Prisoner of Azkaban, the trio sneaks off to Hogsmeade multiple times, and Harry spends many weekends in the Gryffindor common room playing wizard chess or lounging with friends. Meals still appear on time, and beds are always made. But when the elves are busy, as during their apparent strike or momentary distress, what happens to the students? In Half-Blood Prince, after Dobby and Kreacher begin following Draco Malfoy, their absence from the kitchens is noted, but still no disruption in the flow of meals occurs. The implication is troubling. Either the elves are overworked or magically enslaved to maintain their duties without rest, or the school operates on a dangerous over-reliance on beings. Students are never even taught to respect. Neville Longbottom owns a toad named Trevor, a pet, so often lost it becomes a running joke. But consider the deeper implication. Neville, gentle and forgetful, never receives guidance on how to properly care for his animal. There is no class on magical pet husbandry. Hagrid's care of magical creatures covers dangerous beings like hippogriffs and thestrals, but who teaches a student how to groom an owl or treat a niffler's infection? In Chamber of Secrets, Ron's wand backfires spectacularly, turning his rat, Scabbers, temporarily green and fuzzy. No adult steps in to help. There is no magical veterinarian on staff, no pamphlet handed out in first year titled "So You've Got a Familiar." just children guessing their way through real high responsibilities. Even the cleaning spell, Scourgify, known to be used by Tonks and Molly Weasley, is never formally introduced at Hogwarts. Students are expected to learn such charms independently, or, more likely, are presumed to never need them. In Half-Blood Prince, Harry uses Scourgify to clean blood off the floor after Draco is injured. He uses it instinctively, which suggests he either learned it on his own or absorbed it from an outside influence. Why is this not part of first-year charms? Cleaning blood from a floor is not just useful, it is a matter of safety. Yet magical education avoids the real and clings to the abstract. Sirius Black, though from a pure-blood household, lives in squalor at Grimmauld Place after his release from Azkaban. The house is overrun with dark creatures, mold, dust, and decay. Only after the intervention of Molly Weasley and the reluctant help of the Order does the house begin to look livable again. Sirius, rebellious and brilliant, never learned how to maintain a household. He spent his teenage years at Hogwarts and his adult years in prison. When free, he cannot care for himself. It is a silent indictment of the education he received. Luna Lovegood walks barefoot in the corridors, her hair tangled and robes askew. She's depicted as eccentric, but perhaps she is also simply untrained. No one taught her how to properly iron a uniform, tie a robe sash, or braid her hair. In the magical world, external presentation is often tied to inner discipline, as Snape's oily hair and tight robes show. Luna floats through the castle, magical and ignored, her appearance symbolic of a deeper educational neglect. Bathing is another unspoken element. In Goblet of Fire, Harry uses the prefect's bathroom to decode the egg, and the space is described in luxurious detail: marble, enchanted bubbles, golden taps. But how often do ordinary students bathe? Are there communal showers, personal wash basins? Hogwarts has no health class, no hygiene instruction, and no place in its 7-year curriculum for discussing body changes, nutrition, or personal care. Madame Pomfrey can mend bones and regrow skin, but she's never shown reminding a student to brush their teeth. Fred and George Weasley create skiving snack boxes, invent joke items, and later open a thriving business. They learn nothing about entrepreneurship or bookkeeping at school. Every practical skill they possess is self-taught or absorbed at home. They drop out of Hogwarts not because they lack intelligence, but because the institution offers them nothing real. Their success stands as a critique of Hogwarts itself, a place where curiosity thrives but application is ignored. Dean Thomas, a Muggle-born, comes from a non-magical background. He likely entered Hogwarts with basic household knowledge, cooking, laundry, cleaning. But none of that is ever acknowledged or developed. No teacher asks him to share his perspective or experience. Instead, all Muggle knowledge is pushed aside as irrelevant. In Philosopher's Stone, when Hermione speaks reverently of Hogwarts, it's the best school of witchcraft there is, she forgets that it's also the only one in Britain. There is no choice, no comparison, and within that monopoly, critical gaps are ignored. Gilderoy Lockhart is a cautionary tale. All show and no substance, he knows haircare spells and cosmetic charms but fails at dueling, memory, and truth. Yet even his superficial knowledge could have formed the basis for useful instruction. A class on magical hygiene, cosmetic transfiguration, or even clothing repair could have been taught under his leadership. But the school never demands such courses. Lockhart teaches how to sign autographs instead. And the students laugh until they are attacked by Cornish pixies with no clue how to defend themselves. House elves remain the greatest mystery. Their magic is different from wizard magic, capable of breaking rules and bypassing enchantments. They manage the meals, the bedding, the sweeping, and likely even the plumbing, and yet no curriculum exists to help students understand these creatures. In Goblet of Fire, Hermione asks, how can someone not care if they're treated like vermin? The answer is, because they've been trained not to notice. Hogwarts teaches potions but not empathy. Defense against the dark arts but not defense against ignorance. In Deathly Hallows, when Harry, Ron and Hermione live on the run, they struggle to cook, clean and care for themselves. Meals are miserable, clothes are torn, tempers fray. They can duel Death Eaters but not boil eggs. Hermione, the prepared one, brings a bag with an undetectable extension charm, but she forgets to include basic utensils. The trio survives through sheer stubbornness. It is a final exam they were never prepared for. The room of requirement offers the best metaphor. It becomes what you need, a bathroom, a kitchen, a training room, but only if you know how to ask. Most students don't. In Order of the Phoenix, it becomes a practice space for Dumbledore's army, but it could have been so much more. A domestic skills room, a place to learn sewing, first aid, or animal care, but no one imagines it. The gaps in Hogwarts are so normalized that even magic can't fix them. Magical education, at its worst, creates adults who are brilliant but broken. Tom Riddle knew more spells than anyone his age. He could command serpents, craft Horcruxes, and manipulate minds, but he couldn't love, couldn't trust, and couldn't build a home. The orphanage gave him nothing. Hogwarts gave him power, but never peace. A class in cooking would not have saved him, but a lesson in care might have. Molly Weasley represents what Hogwarts lacks. Her home is chaotic but functional. She raises 7 children, cooks without complaint, knits by hand, and manages a magical household without visible help. She is the unseen professor, teaching through care. When Harry enters the burrow, he is fed, clothed, and cherished, not because of magic, but because of homemaking. And yet Hogwarts will never offer such a class, not because it cannot, but because it chooses not to. In a castle where portraits talk and staircases shift, the most magical thing of all, a nurturing environment, remains an illusion. Number 22. No emotional or psychological support at all. Of all the peculiarities in the magical world of Harry Potter, there is one that becomes striking only when revisiting the series with a more mature eye. The astonishing lack of emotional support for students at Hogwarts. Not a single counselor, no pastoral figure to turn to in times of distress. While spells and dueling were taught with great enthusiasm, the equally vital art of emotional resilience was neglected, leaving countless students to quietly suffer under the immense weight of personal trauma, anxiety, and pain. Hogwarts, for all its grandeur and magical wonder, operated as a place where a child's emotional life was largely invisible. The adults in charge, even those with kind intentions, rarely stepped beyond their academic roles to reach out to students in a truly human way. Take Harry Potter himself. The boy who lived walked into Hogwarts carrying a mountain of trauma, abused, neglected, and starved for affection at the Dursleys. At age 11, he was introduced to a world of wonders, but the psychological wounds from his upbringing did not vanish with the wave of a wand. He flinched when touched, took food with urgency as if it might be taken away, and consistently isolated himself rather than risk being hurt or abandoned. Yet no professor, not even Dumbledore, took him aside to ask if he needed someone to talk to. Harry faced Dementors, creatures known to feed on despair, and passed out in their presence, hearing his mother scream in her final moments. The faculty, however, focused only on teaching him a stronger Patronus. No one asked why Harry, among all students, collapsed under their influence. "When they get near me, I can hear Voldemort murdering my mum," Harry once admitted. But the pain behind those words was never probed, never addressed. Neville Longbottom suffered in silence too, though his agony was quieter. Often ridiculed for his clumsiness, he was branded a weakling from the very beginning. "Why is it always me?" he once whispered after another public humiliation. His backstory, raised by a strict grandmother after his parents were tortured into madness, was known to some professors. Yet there was no intervention, No mentor helped him build confidence or taught him coping strategies. Snape belittled him openly, going so far as to force Neville's worst fear, Snape himself, to appear in front of the class during a boggart lesson. This wasn't framed as abuse, it was disguised as education. But for a child with chronic insecurity and trauma, it was psychological cruelty dressed up as pedagogy. Luna Lovegood fared no better. Loony Lovegood, they called her. Her shoes were stolen, her belongings disappeared, and her ideas were mocked. She coped by detaching herself from reality, retreating into a world of nargles and crumple-horned snorkax. It was her way of surviving. And while Luna had a remarkable ability to forgive and find peace, she shouldn't have had to do it alone. No teacher asked why she ate lunch by herself or why her things were stolen so often. It was as though the adults in the castle saw bullying as a natural part of growing up, rather than a serious issue that demanded thoughtful intervention. In a school filled with enchanted ceilings and talking portraits, Luna's quiet suffering was invisible. Even Hermione Granger, the top student with unshakable discipline, showed signs of emotional strain that were never acknowledged. Her obsessive need for control, her fear of failure, her inability to relax. These were red flags, not badges of honor. She was petrified for months during her second year, reduced to a silent, lifeless form in the hospital wing. When she awoke, she resumed her studies with the same intense focus, but did anyone stop to ask how she was coping with the trauma? Or when she used a time turner to attend more classes than any sane person should attempt? Did any adult worry about her mental health, her exhaustion, or her clear lack of boundaries? Then there's Ginny Weasley, only 11 when she was possessed by Lord Voldemort in her first year. She nearly died. She killed chickens, wrote in blood, and lost hours to the control of a dark presence. But once rescued, she was simply returned to the school year as though nothing had happened. No therapy, no long conversations, no emotional care. Her story was folded back into the background. Ginny grew stronger in later books, but she did so without the help of any adult guide. She was expected to recover from demonic possession on her own, surrounded by students who likely whispered about her in corridors. The professors were not heartless, but they were clearly unequipped to handle the psychological needs of their students. Minerva McGonagall was stern and fair, but never warm. Her concern came through in clipped sentences and brisk nods, not in personal attention. Dumbledore, with all his wisdom, maintained a distance that made it nearly impossible for students to seek comfort from him. I make mistakes like the next man. In fact, being, well, rather cleverer than most men, my mistakes tend to be correspondingly huger, he once admitted. But his greatest mistake may have been his unwillingness to see children as emotional beings, not just chess pieces in a war. Perhaps the most glaring example of emotional neglect is how Hogwarts treated the death of Cedric Diggory. A student died on school grounds during a Triwizard task. The official response? Denial. Cornelius Fudge swept the truth under the rug, and Dumbledore, though he insisted on telling the truth at the end-of-year feast, did not establish any long-term support for the grieving students. Where were the memorials, the counsellors, the grief sessions? Cedric's death was acknowledged in a single speech. Then the school moved on. The trauma lingered, but no adult offered a hand to those who needed to grieve. Harry, who watched Cedric die, was plunged into nightmares and isolation, but he was left alone to deal with it. By Harry's 5th year, the weight of these unprocessed traumas began to suffocate him. He lashed out, grew angry, broke things, shouted at friends. His dreams were infiltrated by Voldemort, his mind a battleground of horrors, yet his cries for help were met with suspicion and punishment. Umbridge refused to believe him. Dumbledore avoided him, believing this would protect him. "You care so much, you feel as though you will bleed to death with the pain of it," Dumbledore later confessed. But the pain had already festered for months without support, and still no professional help was offered. Harry was a child soldier recruited into a battle no teenager should fight, and the adults around him seemed more focused on the endgame than the boy breaking apart inside it. Even the Order of the Phoenix, a group of well-meaning protectors, failed to see Harry as anything but a symbol. They placed him under watch, withheld information from him, and treated his outbursts as nuisances rather than cries for help. Sirius Black, the closest thing Harry had to a father figure, encouraged risk-taking and rebellion, but never taught Harry how to heal. When Sirius died, Harry's grief was oceanic. "There's no need to call me Sir, Professor," he snapped at Snape afterward, rage boiling beneath the surface. Once again, he was not comforted. He was scolded, restrained, and expected to move forward. Contrast this with the way Hogwarts treats academic or physical challenges. Madame Pomfrey is always on hand with a potion or a spell to heal broken bones or fevers. Professors assign homework and detention with precision. Quidditch injuries are mended in hours. But emotional wounds? They're not seen, they're not discussed, they're certainly not healed. No classroom is ever dedicated to mindfulness, no teacher trained in trauma-informed care. In a castle filled with ghosts, the real hauntings are the unspoken stories of its living children. Tom Riddle was once a student at Hogwarts too, a boy from a loveless orphanage with a hunger for control and belonging. Had someone reached out, truly reached out, would the story have ended differently? Dumbledore visited him, yes, but the visit was cold and clinical, a transaction rather than a connection. A child already twisted by years of neglect was brought into a magical world and given power, but not love. He was told what not to do, he was warned, but he was never guided. The consequences were catastrophic. Even Draco Malfoy, often viewed as the privileged antagonist, shows signs of unbearable pressure by the 6th book. When tasked with a mission from Voldemort, he begins to unravel, pale, thin, visibly anxious, even suicidal. "No one can help me," he said in the bathroom before nearly being killed by a Sectum Sempra curse. And he was right. No one did. Hogwarts was not a place where students were helped through moral crises. It was a place where you either passed or failed. And if you failed, you did so alone. The house system itself encouraged rivalry, isolation, and performance. Slytherins were vilified, Gryffindors idolized, Hufflepuffs were forgotten, Ravenclaws were expected to be brilliant or be silent. There were no conversations about community across houses, no programs to build empathy. Students were sorted at age 11 and expected to stay in that identity forever, regardless of how they evolved. There was no room for transformation, no room for weakness, only points, punishments, and house pride. Even after the Battle of Hogwarts, when so many died defending the school, there's no mention of how the survivors processed what happened. Fred Weasley was gone, Lupin and Tonks. So many young people fought and bled and saw death with their own eyes. But Rowling ends the story with a jump into the future, skipping over the recovery. The epilogue is neat and bright, but we are left to imagine how the wounded were ever made whole. Perhaps they never were. In the end, Hogwarts was a magical castle, but an emotionally barren one. It gave its students wands but no words, spells but no sanctuary, knowledge but no kindness. Its ghosts were not only those that drifted through walls, but the invisible pains of children waiting to be seen. Number 23, threatening kids with Azkaban was not okay. There is a moment in the Harry Potter series when, as a young reader, you may simply skim past a line or feel a vague sense of danger. But when you return to those pages as an adult, something begins to itch under your skin. A discomfort, a quiet question. Why is Azkaban, the most terrifying prison in the wizarding world, so often spoken of in conversations with children? In the Chamber of Secrets, after Dobby drops the pudding in the Dursleys' kitchen, Harry receives a letter from the Ministry of Magic warning him that he has performed magic outside school. The letter coldly states, Any further spell work may lead to expulsion from Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. This threat, already shocking when directed at a 12-year-old, carries with it a deeper implication. Expulsion is not merely a matter of education. In the wizarding world, it's often a path to legal punishment. Hagrid even warns Harry that expulsion means the Ministry could snap your wand in half. And in a world where a wand is almost a limb, that's not just discipline, that's a disabling sentence. Harry didn't actually cast that spell. And even if he had, it would have been in his own home, in reaction to something extraordinary. But the letter is immediate, impersonal, and threatening. It doesn't ask for context. It doesn't allow for mistakes. And behind the lines, there is an unspoken shadow, Azkaban. It hovers like a curse in the background of every mention of magical misconduct. By the time the Order of the Phoenix opens, Harry has grown older, and so has the danger. After casting a Patronus in defense against 2 Dementors that appeared in Little Whinging, a situation the Ministry itself suspiciously arranged, Harry is not only threatened with expulsion again, but also summoned to a full court hearing. The language used by Cornelius Fudge is particularly disturbing. He speaks to Harry not as a child in a terrifying situation, but as a political criminal. You are hereby notified that you are expelled from Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, the letter reads, and your wand will be confiscated and destroyed at once. A 15-year-old boy assaulted in the street by soul-sucking creatures is treated not as a victim, but as a violator of law. Fudge doesn't hesitate to suggest incarceration. There is no concern for the trauma of the Dementor attack, no compassion for the fact that Harry is a minor. The machinery of magical law is cold and absolute, and the deeper one looks, the more chilling this machinery becomes. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, Harry runs away from Privet Drive after accidentally inflating his aunt. He's emotionally distressed, traumatized by mistreatment, and completely alone. In any other world, the authorities might offer help, counseling or care, but not here. Harry spends the next several hours anxiously waiting for punishment. He genuinely believes he might be sent to Azkaban. He doesn't believe anyone will ask why he did it, only that he did. That is the culture the Ministry has bred, not one of understanding, but of fear. What makes this all the more disturbing is that Harry's belief is not exaggerated. In fact, it's been reinforced throughout his childhood. Children in the wizarding world are constantly told that any deviation from rules might lead to severe punishment. Even Fred and George, whose rule-breaking is often playful and rebellious, hint at the seriousness of Ministry control. They never joke about Azkaban. That place is too real, too feared, and its presence is never far from the conversation when magic goes wrong. Let us recall Marietta Edgecombe in The Order of the Phoenix. When she betrays Dumbledore's army, her punishment is not meted out by the Ministry. It's done by a fellow student, Hermione, who has enchanted the parchment with a curse that scars Marietta's face. But what happens after? There is a moment when Harry wonders if the Ministry might prosecute the DA's students for forming an illegal organization. And again, the silent possibility of Azkaban looms. Dolores Umbridge takes that threat to another level. She openly discusses legal punishment with students. She uses her position at Hogwarts to terrify children into submission, and the Ministry supports her tactics. During Harry's trial, she watches eagerly. Her role is not educational, it is enforcement. She embodies the Ministry's willingness to treat teenagers as adults in the eyes of magical law, to threaten, intimidate, and silence. Her presence alone is a weapon. The worst example comes from The Half-Blood Prince, when 11-year-old Tom Riddle, the future Voldemort, confesses to using magic on fellow orphans. Dumbledore, rather than reporting him, takes a calm and cautious approach. He knows the Ministry would not be so gentle. They might consider punishment rather than protection. This moment is subtle but crucial. The question lingers: how many children before Tom were threatened, isolated, or even imprisoned under a system that didn't believe in mistakes. Even Sirius Black, who was imprisoned without trial, proves the system's inhumanity. Although not a child at the time of his arrest, his story becomes a warning. He is locked away for 12 years, surrounded by Dementors, denied legal defense. The Ministry didn't pause to investigate. They believed what was convenient, and in doing so, they sent a message to the rest of the world. Your age does not matter. Your name does not matter. Fear is the law. Imagine growing up in that world, learning your first spells, but knowing that a wrong word, a flick of the wrist, could bring investigators to your door. That making a Patronus, a light in the dark, could be considered a criminal act. That crying out for help might earn you a court date, a snapped wand, a cell among the madness. The Dementors, too, are more than just guards. They are psychological torture. The fact that the wizarding world uses them not only for convicted criminals but for threats and showmanship, like placing them around a school during The Prisoner of Azkaban, is horrifying. Their presence sends a message. The Ministry is watching, and mercy is not part of the plan. And what of other students? Draco Malfoy boasts about connections in the Ministry, suggesting that power can shield you. But who defends the children without such privilege? Who protects the ones like Harry, like Neville, like Luna, who don't come from politically connected families? The law in the wizarding world is not only strict, it is selective. Take the case of Stan Shunpike, a low-level conductor for the night bus. Stan is arrested during the Half-Blood Prince as part of a Ministry show of strength. They accuse him of Death Eater ties without proof and send him to Azkaban. Harry is furious. He's just a stupid boy, Harry says, and he was trying to make himself sound more important than he was. The phrase, stupid boy, echoes painfully. How many other stupid boys or stupid girls have ended up there, lost in a system that prefers symbols over fairness? What makes Azkaban so terrifying isn't only its function, it's its very existence. A prison that destroys your mind, feeds on your joy and leaves you hollow. A place where even adults lose themselves. Yet children grow up hearing its name like a bedtime threat. Misbehave and you'll go to Azkaban. Use magic the wrong way and the Dementors will come. No one tells them that the system is flawed. No one explains that the laws are enforced by fear, not logic. It's not just the punishments that are wrong, it's the culture. The normalization of terror, the way everyone, from parents to teachers to ministers, speaks of Azkaban as if it were a natural part of justice. Even the professors at Hogwarts, for all their warmth, rarely challenge this culture. They operate within it. They speak of the Ministry with dread, but do little to change its reach. Dumbledore, the only figure with both power and principle, struggles constantly to shield his students. But he is just one man. The rest seem resigned to the system. The wizarding world trains its children to fear law more than to respect it. To follow rules not because they are right, but because punishment is unbearable. That is not education. That is indoctrination. That is trauma packaged in the illusion of discipline. It makes one wonder what happens to the children who truly stumble, who cast a curse they don't understand, who are caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. Is there a rehabilitation program, a second chance, or is there only silence and Azkaban? And then comes the final insult. After Voldemort's defeat, after all the Ministry's failures, the world goes on as before. There is no great trial of the legal system, no reckoning with the horror of Dementors as state tools, no review of laws that threatened schoolchildren. The characters grow older, but the world remains the same, and that, perhaps, is the real tragedy. Number 24, there were no entrance exams. Seriously? In the magical world of Harry Potter, few things seem more wondrous than the idea of being whisked away to a school like Hogwarts. A letter arrives by owl announcing that you're a witch or wizard, and within weeks You are standing on platform 934, steaming toward a castle filled with enchantments, ghosts, and flying broomsticks. But in a more conscious rereading of the series, one detail begins to glow with oddity. Hogwarts, this elite institution responsible for educating the magical youth of Britain, does not require any entrance examination. No magical tests, no interviews, no background screening, not even a basic measure of sanity. A child simply receives a letter and is in. That's it. This one fact, seemingly whimsical on the surface, opens a corridor of deeper questions, many of which hint at the underlying fragility of the wizarding world itself. Consider how this admission process stands in stark contrast to the prestige associated with Hogwarts. It is, without doubt, the most esteemed magical school in Britain, yet its selection process is no more complex than you are 11 and your name's on a list. There is no filtering mechanism to determine who has control over their magic, who is dangerously impulsive, or even who understands that magic exists. Indeed, children raised in Muggle households, like Hermione Granger and Harry Potter himself, have never even seen a spell cast until their first day on the Hogwarts Express. And yet they are admitted just the same as Draco Malfoy, who's been taught wand movements since infancy. This lack of evaluation results in a profoundly mixed student body, not only in terms of ability, but in terms of emotional maturity and psychological readiness. Some arrive hungry for knowledge, like Hermione, who memorized her books before arriving. Others, like Seamus Finnegan, seem barely aware of the discipline required to control magic, famously causing explosions during simple charms lessons. In The Philosopher's Stone, Professor Flitwick must soothe the class after a spell misfires. "Don't worry, Seamus. Everyone gets it wrong the first time," he says gently, though a classroom full of unpredictable children hurling sparks doesn't sound like a sustainable educational model. And it isn't just Seamus. Neville Longbottom, a pure-blood wizard, comes from a magical family and yet fails, again and again, to demonstrate control over his abilities. In his very first flying lesson, he loses control of his broom and ends up hanging from a gargoyle, crashing down and breaking his wrist. In any Muggle institution, this level of unpreparedness might call for intervention or remedial help. At Hogwarts, it's brushed aside as charming chaos. But beneath the charm lies an implicit danger. Magic, after all, is not a toy, it is lethal. Even first-year spells, improperly cast, can lead to explosions, injuries, and accidental transformations. The case of Crabbe and Goyle, Slytherins best known for their loyalty to Malfoy and not for their intellect, further highlights the danger of Hogwarts' open-door policy. These boys seem to lack even a basic comprehension of their subjects. In the Chamber of Secrets, Goyle struggles to spell his own name correctly during a polyjuice potion operation. The potion, mind you, is a dangerous concoction that requires strict adherence to magical guidelines. The fact that two dim-witted 12-year-olds are permitted to brew it, even in secret, suggests that the school vastly overestimates its students' sense of responsibility, or perhaps never attempts to gauge it at all. Then there's the issue of magical aptitude. While it's never stated directly in the books, it's heavily implied that not all magical children possess the same potential. Some seem naturally gifted. Tom Riddle, for example, was performing advanced magic by the time he was 10. Others, like Filch, are born to magical families but lack magic entirely. He is a squib, and his bitter resentment towards students reflects the exclusion he must have felt. But what about borderline cases? Are there children who are weak in magic, barely capable of performing spells, but still admitted? How many students drop out before their OWLs? The books don't tell us, but the lack of entry assessment makes it entirely plausible. This inclusiveness might be well-intentioned, perhaps even noble, but it also creates a volatile environment. In The Half-Blood Prince, for example, Cormac McLaggen consumes a potion that renders him aggressive and unstable during Quidditch tryouts. His behavior is tolerated with annoyance, not alarm. No teacher appears to consider that McLaggen, like many students, is walking around the castle with access to powerful magic, unchecked by any psychological evaluation. When you think about it, this is akin to giving children loaded weapons with no safety course, and yet this is the standard at Hogwarts. Moreover, the danger isn't limited to academic recklessness. The very social ecosystem of Hogwarts can be cruel, intense, and unregulated. Bullying is rampant. In the Philosopher's Stone, Draco Malfoy openly mocks Ron Weasley's poverty and Hermione's parentage. In the Order of the Phoenix, Umbridge torments students with sadistic punishments, carving words into Harry's hand. If there were entrance interviews, perhaps staff could have filtered for temperament or vulnerability. But there are none. Hogwarts becomes not just a place of learning, but a crucible in which the emotionally fragile and the dangerously proud are thrown together to fend for themselves. Harry himself, perhaps the most famous Hogwarts student of all, arrives at school with zero knowledge of the magical world, no prior training, and significant emotional trauma from years of abuse by the Dursleys. While some teachers, like McGonagall and Lupin, offer kindness, there is no formal system in place to address the mental health of incoming students. No counselling, no onboarding, no orientation. Even as late as The Prisoner of Azkaban, Harry is reeling from nightmarish experiences, seeing dementors and reliving his parents' deaths, and yet he is treated primarily as a student who must pass exams, not a child who needs help. In the absence of filters, house placement becomes a sort of surrogate admissions test, one performed by the Sorting Hat. But even the Hat's choices are based on personality, not ability, and its decisions are not always accurate or safe. Placing an ambitious child like Tom Riddle into a house notorious for breeding dark wizards may have exacerbated his worst tendencies. It's notable that the Hat briefly considered putting Harry in Slytherin, a child barely aware of what that house represented. "You could be great, you know," the Hat whispers. "It's all here in your head." But was that really the best moment to make such a judgment? The inconsistency grows sharper when you consider how the Ministry of Magic regulates adult witches and wizards. Wands are registered, apparition is licensed. Magical creatures are restricted, and yet the very place responsible for training young witches and wizards enforces no threshold for entry. Even the acceptance letter offers no warning of the dangers ahead. There is no disclaimer, no consent form, not even a paragraph explaining what to expect. Parents are expected to send their children into this world blind, and they do so, often with complete trust. Contrast this with Beauxbatons or Durmstrang, both of which are mentioned as elite schools with stricter policies. Victor Krum, a Durmstrang student, displays astonishing discipline and control during the Triwizard Tournament. It's implied that Durmstrang does not tolerate academic weakness or behavioral inconsistency. Beauxbatons, meanwhile, is renowned for its elegance and rigor. Yet Hogwarts, despite being in the same league, functions more like an enchanted daycare crossed with a battlefield. And what of the magical families who might wish to homeschool? There is no indication that they are encouraged to do so. The Hogwarts letter arrives with an unspoken expectation. This is where your child will go. Even Luna Lovegood, an eccentric and delicate girl, ends up navigating the harshness of Hogwarts largely alone. Her intelligence and kindness go unnoticed by most of her classmates, and yet no teacher seems to step in to help her integrate. Perhaps in a system where admittance is automatic, care must be rationed. Indeed, the automatic nature of admission makes Hogwarts feel less like an academic institution and more like a rite of passage. A magical child is born, they receive the letter, and they go. There is no alternative, no opt-out, no real discussion. It's a conveyor belt, glorious, chaotic, and unexamined. The few who resist or deviate, like Tom Riddle or, later, Harry, in the Order of the Phoenix, are met with suspicion or intervention. The system, once set in motion, assumes its own infallibility. And still we return to the idea of power. Magic is not benign. In the Goblet of Fire, a boy is killed before a crowd of spectators. In The Half-Blood Prince, a curse placed on a necklace nearly kills Katie Bell. In the Chamber of Secrets, students are petrified and a monster roams the halls. And these are just the incidents that the books narrate. What else has gone unnoticed, undocumented? If there were entry requirements, some proof of readiness, might some of these tragedies have been avoided? Even Dumbledore, with all his wisdom, seems complacent in the system. He praises bravery, encourages self-discovery, and protects students when he can, but he never once questions the process by which students arrive. He treats their presence as a given. And perhaps that's the strangest thing of all. In a world filled with sentient hats, vanishing cabinets, and deadly prophecies, the most unbelievable part of Hogwarts is the fact that everyone just gets in. There is a moment in The Philosopher's Stone where Hagrid tells Harry, "You're a wizard, Harry." It is meant to be a magical moment, and it is, but in hindsight, it's also the only admission standard there is. No test, no proof, no assessment, just a proclamation. From that point forward, the path is set, and while that makes for a thrilling beginning, it also means that the world of magic, as seen through the gates of Hogwarts, rests on the assumption that all magical children are ready. But what if they're not? Number 25. Students were always the ones saving the school. The first time Harry Potter met Albus Dumbledore, the headmaster had a twinkle in his eye and a calm demeanour that suggested control. Yet, over the course of 7 years, that control often slipped into eerie silence or mysterious absences. Looking back, what appears as the nurturing of heroic students begins to resemble an abdication of adult responsibility. When the basilisk stalked the halls in the Chamber of Secrets, it wasn't Dumbledore who defeated it, nor was it Professor Snape or Professor McGonagall who faced the serpent in the depths of the school. It was Harry, a 12-year-old with a sword far too heavy for his size. The adults either left, were deceived, or simply watched from the sidelines. What kind of school places such burden on children's shoulders? Even in The Philosopher's Stone, it was the trio of first years who went after the stone while their professors were still in the building. The very teachers who designed the obstacles beneath the trapdoor couldn't predict that 11-year-olds would penetrate them, nor did they seem to monitor the corridors that led to it. Quirrell, the man hiding Voldemort on the back of his head, passed through Hogwarts undetected for nearly a year. Not one teacher, not even Snape, who suspected something, managed to uncover his secret. "There is no good and evil, there is only power," Quirrell had said. But the terrifying truth was that the power to stop him belonged to Harry, not the staff. That was the first of many times the castle's fate would rest on a child's decision. When Cedric Diggory died in the graveyard during the Triwizard Tournament, the shockwave it sent through the school wasn't met with institutional reform or adult protection. Instead, it spurred Dumbledore to gather the Order of the Phoenix, yes, but within the castle, it was again the students who acted. Dolores Umbridge, backed by the Ministry, took control, and instead of Dumbledore defending the school from within, he vanished. As the Ministry tightened its grip, the students formed Dumbledore's army. The irony was jarring. The only resistance within Hogwarts to a corrupt authority was orchestrated by a 15-year-old boy and his schoolmates. Working hard is important, but there is something that matters even more: believing in yourself, Harry told them during training. But was it belief or survival? In Order of the Phoenix, Professor Umbridge tortured students, banned practical education, and spread fear. The staff observed but seldom interfered. McGonagall voiced her discontent but never stopped the atrocities. Snape witnessed Umbridge using a blood quill on Harry and offered no help. The cruelty was public, not hidden, and yet no adult stepped in to end it. It was Hermione who devised the Room of Requirement. It was the DA who trained themselves in defense. And it was the DA who ultimately formed the resistance. Why should children need to become soldiers in their own school? The Half-Blood Prince paints a more tragic picture. Dumbledore, aware of Voldemort's return and planning for his own death, recruited Harry into a campaign of memory hunting. The headmaster's mission was noble, yes, but he tasked a teenager with uncovering the secrets of the most dangerous dark wizard in history. He handed him snippets of memory, cryptic assignments, and withheld crucial information. Then Dumbledore died, and Harry was left alone. "I'm not worried, Harry," he had said in the Philosopher's Stone. "I am with you." But by the Half-Blood Prince, he wasn't. He left the burden of the final fight, Horcruxes and all, to students. Is this mentorship or abdication? During the final battle in the Deathly Hallows, the staff finally took up arms. McGonagall conjured protective enchantments. Flitwick fought. Trelawney even hurled crystal balls. But the command decision still came from Harry, Ron, and Hermione. It was Harry who figured out the truth about the diadem. It was Ron and Hermione who destroyed Horcruxes. Neville Longbottom, another student, beheaded Nagini. The adults were present, yes, but the vital acts of sacrifice and strategy belonged to students. The world isn't split into good people and Death Eaters, Sirius had once told Harry, but perhaps the world shouldn't split its defences between children and grown men either. In the Goblet of Fire, the mere fact that Harry was entered into a deadly tournament as a 14-year-old should have caused the school to halt everything. Yet because of a binding magical contract, the adults did nothing. Magical contracts are unbreakable, they said. But who signed Harry up? Who let a boy face dragons, mermaids, and a deadly maze? And when the tasks became increasingly dangerous, where was the adult resistance? It wasn't until Harry returned from the graveyard carrying Cedric's corpse that the truth dawned. No one was protecting them. What's even more unsettling is how the adults often justified their absence with the notion of destiny. Harry was the chosen one, and with that title came not protection, but responsibility. He was the youngest Seeker in a century, but also the boy expected to save lives. In the Order of the Phoenix, when Arthur Weasley was attacked, it was Harry who saw it in a vision and had to report it. Not an aura, not a professor, but a teenager. The school, in all its splendour, seemed constructed on the unspoken rule that in crisis, students must rise. There were exceptions. Lupin, during his brief tenure, truly tried to protect his class. He taught Harry the Patronus, yes, but also showed him care. But Lupin was removed for being a werewolf, exposing again the prejudices of the adult world, prejudices the students were expected to ignore or challenge. When Buckbeak was sentenced to death, it wasn't the Ministry or the professors who saved him. It was Hermione, using a time-turner, breaking all kinds of laws guided by desperation, not policy. Even the Marauder's map, an object that revealed the entire castle and everyone in it, was created not by professors or magical engineers, but by 4 mischief-loving students. The very tools that Harry used to survive were legacies from children past. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, when Sirius Black was presumed to be a mass murderer, Hogwarts heightened security. Dementors were stationed at every gate. But in the end, it was Hermione and Harry who travelled back in time to save 2 lives, not the Ministry, not Dumbledore. Their time travel was sanctioned, but unsupervised. Why then, in a school with magical protections, wise professors, enchanted artifacts, and centuries of experience, did children continue to bear the burden? Because Hogwarts wasn't just a school, it was a battlefield, and its battlefield was governed by tradition, secrecy, and a strange acceptance of fate. The portraits watched, the ghosts whispered, the suits of armour stood still. But when danger came, it was Harry who moved. It was Hermione who calculated. It was Ron who jumped into danger. They didn't want to be heroes, they had to be. Even minor events followed this pattern. In Chamber of Secrets, when Justin Finch-Fletchley and nearly headless Nick were petrified, it was the students who panicked. Filch blamed Harry. Rumours spread, but there was no institutional mental health support, no assembly of reassurance, no adult-led investigation that bore fruit. It was Harry who followed spiders. It was Hermione who figured out the basilisk and was attacked before she could share it. Only when a student cracked the puzzle did the truth come out. At times, this creates the illusion of empowerment. Hogwarts turns children into warriors, leaders, strategists, but the cost is enormous. Fred Weasley died. Colin Creevey, too. Cedric was murdered. Lavender Brown likely perished. Harry himself carried physical and emotional scars far beyond his years. "You're the weak one," Harry once said to Voldemort, "and you'll never know love or friendship." But those words came from a boy who had seen more death than most grown men. The culture at Hogwarts didn't just permit child heroism, it relied on it. From the moment Harry arrived, the house system pitted students against one another. Rivalry was encouraged, glory was sought. The Triwizard Cup was meant to be a friendly competition. It became a death trap, and the teachers cheered it on. Even Mad-Eye Moody, or rather Barty Crouch Jr., operated for months under everyone's noses, poisoning students and warping events, all under adult supervision. Even Snape, the double agent, played a long game. He protected Harry out of love for Lily, yes, but he did so with bitterness and cruelty. He endangered students emotionally while guarding them physically. The balance was off, safety was conditional, and understanding came too late. Dumbledore's own strategy seemed to rest on hope that Harry would be ready. Ready for what? To kill? To die? He handed him a cloak of invisibility as a Christmas gift and set him on a path no child should walk. "Do not pity the dead, Harry," he later told him. "Pity the living." But Harry was the living, and he was a child. Dumbledore's words are poetic, his actions less so. Even the conclusion of the saga reinforces this pattern. The Battle of Hogwarts ended with children holding the line while adults assisted. Kingsley Shacklebolt and Professor Sprout did their part, but the emotional weight and strategic outcomes rested on students. Again, Harry faced death alone in the forest. The final confrontation with Voldemort was his and his alone. Not a team, not an army, a boy, barely. 17, standing before the most powerful dark wizard in centuries. What Hogwarts taught, perhaps unintentionally, was resilience born of neglect. Heroism bred from necessity, friendship forged under siege. It's compelling, it's inspiring, but it's also deeply troubling. Looking back as adults ourselves, we can't help but wonder, why were they alone? Why were children allowed, encouraged even, to carry the fate of the wizarding world on their small shoulders? Hogwarts remains a place of wonder, but behind the feasts, the floating candles, and the cheering crowds lies a quiet, unsettling truth. The school was magical, yes, but it was also a place where children saved the day not because they wanted to, but because no one else would. Number 26. Hogwarts did not prepare you for adult life. At 17, Hermione Granger could brew a perfect polyjuice potion, alter the shape of her teeth with a wand flick, and erase her parents' memories with heartbreaking precision. But ask her to fill out a tax form, register a home address, or apply for a job outside the ministry, and she'd be as lost as a first year in the Forbidden Forest. For all its grandeur, mystery, and magic, Hogwarts' School of Witchcraft and Wizardry never prepared its students for the ordinary hardships of adult life. It gave them the keys to a universe of power, but left them fumbling in the dark when it came to practical survival. The curriculum at Hogwarts was a dazzling array of subjects that no doubt enchanted young minds: charms, potions, transfiguration, and defense against the dark arts, all tailored to develop magical talent. But none of these classes offered any inkling of what to do once you'd aged out of the castle's protection. There was no mention of how to create a magical resume, no interview training, and certainly no advice on how to manage money at Gringotts. Fred and George Weasley opened a wildly successful joke shop, but not thanks to any course in business management or entrepreneurial strategy. They had to defy school expectations and teach themselves how to navigate the adult world. Even basic life skills were mysteriously absent from the Hogwarts syllabus. Students were left to assume that house elves or charm-enhanced objects would do all domestic tasks forever. No one taught them how to cook, do laundry, manage a household budget, or even write a formal letter outside of owl posts. What would happen if a wizard lost his wand or found himself stranded among muggles? There was no class titled Magical Contingency Planning. A wizard's entire identity was constructed around his ability to perform spells. But what if the magic ran out? The fact that Muggle-borns like Hermione or Dean Thomas ever survived the transition from Hogwarts to the adult world is a testament to their upbringing before the age of 11. Hermione, in particular, had the benefit of 2 dentists for parents who probably instilled in her a respect for organization and planning. But even she, with all her brilliance, did not know how to navigate the real world once Voldemort was defeated. She went on to work at the Ministry, a path already paved with connections and prestige. But what if she had chosen a different route? What if she had wanted to become a magical writer, a small business owner, or stay connected to the Muggle world? It's revealing that the only real guidance students received regarding their futures came in the form of a brief pamphlet handed out in 5th year. This moment, buried in Order of the Phoenix, was so understated it's almost laughable in retrospect. As Professor McGonagall tried to help Harry navigate the path to becoming an Auror, it became clear that no system was in place to guide students with less conventional dreams. There were no career fairs, no job shadowing programs, no coursework tailored to life outside the rigid structures of ministry employment. Take Ron Weasley as an example. He left Hogwarts with courage, loyalty, and a healthy disrespect for authority, but very few marketable skills. He stumbled into a position as an Auror more out of circumstance than planning. His only qualifications? Fighting Death Eaters during his school years. And even then it was Harry's fame that smoothed the way for both of them. What would have happened to Ron if not for his association with Harry and Hermione? Would he have worked at the Leaky Cauldron, or ended up back at the Burrow, aimless and unsure? The absence of formal education in interpersonal skills is equally troubling. Hogwarts offered no course on conflict resolution, negotiation, or even emotional intelligence. Considering how often magical disputes escalated into duels, perhaps the school should have considered lessons on nonviolent communication. Young witches and wizards were sent into a deeply divided magical society with little understanding of how to bridge its gaps. The division between purebloods, half-bloods, and Muggle-borns remained sharp even after the war, and nothing in the Hogwarts curriculum addressed these issues head-on. The situation becomes even more precarious when one considers the lack of infrastructure for magical and Muggle integration. What if a student wanted to return to the non-magical world after graduation? There was no instruction on how to apply for a Muggle job, no training in non-magical technology, and no sense of how to legally exist outside the wizarding sphere. The Ministry might keep tabs on magical citizens, but who helped them with Muggle bureaucracy? The Statute of Secrecy wasn't just a law, it was a prison for those unable to balance 2 identities. The fate of Seamus Finnegan serves as a quiet example of post-Hogwarts limbo. Never as academically brilliant as Hermione or as famously courageous as Harry, Seamus likely left school with few prospects. We hear little about him after the Battle of Hogwarts, and one can only imagine the difficulties he faced trying to carve a life in a society with narrow definitions of success. Without clear pathways, students like him may have been left floundering, relying on family or luck rather than competence. Meanwhile, the wizarding world remained economically opaque. Students were never taught how wizarding currency functioned beyond the vague conversion of galleons, sickles, and nuts. Gringotts was a place to store gold, not to understand financial systems. There was no education on taxes, loans, budgeting, or investments. Wizards like Bill Weasley, who worked as a curse breaker for Gringotts, must have learned about money management on the job, if at all. What about young witches and wizards with no wealthy families or vaults in the bank? Even magical transportation was treated as a privilege, not a public good. Students learned to apparate under strict supervision, and only after reaching a certain age. But what if they failed the test? There was no fallback system, no equivalent to a Muggle driver's license program with opportunities to retake the test or receive additional instruction. Apparition was dangerous and could lead to splinching, a terrifying accident. Side-along apparition wasn't a sustainable long-term option for an adult who needed to travel independently. The absence of practical training was especially egregious when compared to the dangerous world these students inhabited. They learned to duel, to fight off dark creatures, and to protect themselves from curses. But what about emotional trauma, survivor's guilt, or mental health? After the Battle of Hogwarts, who counseled the survivors? Who helped them deal with grief, identity crises, and the challenge of building a new life from the ruins? The silence in the books speaks volumes. One can't help but contrast Hogwarts with Muggle institutions. Even in less than perfect educational systems, students are at least exposed to subjects like civics, economics, or personal health. In Muggle schools, teenagers take driving lessons, are guided through career counseling, and might even learn how to prepare a meal or sew a button. The wizarding world, so proud of its ancient traditions, remained frozen in a time when those responsibilities were left to family or personal initiative. There is something eerily insular about the Hogwarts model. It creates wizards who are brilliant within its narrow confines, but who may struggle to function in a broader context. The tragedy of Tom Riddle illustrates this perfectly. Raised in a Muggle orphanage and then absorbed completely into the magical world, he had no grounding in the realities of human relationships or non-magical life. Hogwarts gave him power, but not perspective. He understood spells, not people. Similarly, Harry himself, the boy who lived, spent his formative years in both worlds, yet never fully belonged to either. He entered adulthood with a vault of gold, the love of his friends, and the trauma of a war survivor. But how did he learn to be a parent? How did he navigate adulthood without role models beyond Dumbledore, whose guidance ended in death and secrecy? The epilogue in Deathly Hallows shows Harry at King's Cross with his children, but skips over the awkward, necessary steps of learning how to live. Ginny Weasley, a fiery and talented witch, eventually became a professional Quidditch player. But again, this wasn't a result of any school coaching program. There was no athletic career pathway at Hogwarts, no magical sports academy to guide young talent. She simply made it, as so many others did, by stumbling into opportunity rather than following a structured plan.